She said it to her friends while I was standing 4 feet away, slicing a lemon cake. Mom keeps everything running around here. Honestly, it's perfect. She doesn't really have anywhere else to be. 7 women laughed, nodded, lifted their wine glasses. My daughter Corinne sat at the head of her dining room table, looking comfortable and relieved, the way people look when they've just explained a solution. I stood at the counter with the knife in my hand. Nobody turned around. The cake was already cut. That was 8 months after I'd moved in. I'd come because she asked me to. That part matters. She called on a Wednesday in March, and her voice had that particular thinness to it. Not quite crying, but close. And she said the second baby was coming earlier than expected, and Aaron's mother couldn't travel, and the sitter had quit, and she just didn't know how she was going to manage. Could I come? Just for a while, just until she got back on her feet. I had an apartment then, a real one, with my name on the lease and a parking spot I didn't have to share. I'd lived alone for 5 years since my husband Bernard passed, and it hadn't been easy at first, but eventually I learned how to fill the silence. I had a library card I used every 2 weeks, Thursday ceramics class I looked forward to all month. A neighbor named Arlene who knocked on my door every Friday with a bottle of Chardonnay and enough gossip to last us till midnight. I told myself I'd be gone by summer. I packed 2 suitcases and drove 4 hours north and thought, how good it feels to be needed. The first few weeks were soft and busy in the way new babies make everything. Corinne's older daughter, Mia, was 7 and adjusting to a lot of change all at once. New sibling, new schedule, her mother exhausted and often unavailable. She started sleeping in my room some nights, and I didn't mind. She smelled like the grape shampoo Corinne bought in bulk, and she always fell asleep mid-sentence, which made me smile. What I didn't notice then, because I was too tired to notice anything, was how the house was slowly reorganizing itself around my presence. Not with my input, just around me, the way water finds a new path after something blocks the old one. By June, the guest room I'd been given became Corinne's home office. Just temporarily, she explained, because the baby needed the nursery and she needed somewhere to take calls. Could I move to the sunroom? It was quieter there anyway, she said. More private. She said it like she was doing me a favor. The sunroom had no closet. I kept my clothes in a laundry basket. At 64 years old, I kept my clothes in a laundry basket. I didn't say anything. I told myself families shift and bend. I told myself this was what love looked like. By August, I had a schedule. Not one anyone handed me, just one that way habits do, out of necessity and silence. I woke at 6 to start breakfast. Got Mia ready for school while Corinne nursed the baby. 2 loads of laundry before 10. Swept and mopped, made lunch, picked Mia up at 3:15, helped with homework. Started dinner by 5. Bathed both girls while Corinne was on a work call that always ran long. Tiddied the kitchen. Was in my sunroom by 9. There was no paycheck. There was no thank you either. Not after the first month. After that, it was just expected. The expectation was so complete that when I was sick one morning in October, a stomach bug, the kind that flattens, Corinne knocked on my door and asked if I could at least get Mia's lunch packed before I lay back down. I packed the lunch. But it was the book club evening that something finally broke loose inside me. They arrived at 7 with wine and a cheese platter. I made myself small in the kitchen the way I'd learned to do when her friends came over. Not hiding, just not taking up space. Corinne had mentioned earlier that week that it would be nice if I could put together a light dessert. So I'd baked a lemon cake from a recipe I'd made since my own daughters were small. I was cutting it when she said what she said. Mom keeps everything running around here. She doesn't really have anywhere else to be. The women didn't look at me. Corinne didn't look at me. She was already moving on. A book someone had suggested, a restaurant they'd been meaning to try. I stood at the counter with the knife still in my hand, and I thought, so that's what I am here. A solution. Convenient and unobtrusive, like a good appliance. I put the cake on a platter, carried it to the table, set it down, said nothing. Later, washing dishes alone while laughter drifted from the dining room. I thought about Bernard. He'd been a quiet man, but he noticed things. He would have noticed me standing at that counter. He would have pulled me aside afterward and said, in his way, that we needed to talk about what was going on in that house. he would have been right. I started paying closer attention after that. The way you do when you've been sleepwalking and something finally shakes you awake. I noticed that Corinne never said my name when she introduced me to people. When someone new came to the door, a neighbor, a delivery driver, a parent from Mia's school, she'd gesture vaguely in my direction and say, "That's my mom," the way you might point out a piece of furniture. Not hostile, just incidental. I noticed that Aaron never once asked how I was doing. Not once in 8 months. He was not a cruel man. He was an absent one. He came home from work, ate dinner, went to the garage for whatever project he had going, came inside, and went to bed. I'd lived in his house for 8 months, and we'd probably exchanged 400 words total. I noticed the debit card. It was a Thursday morning. I was going through my bank statement, a habit from my bookkeeping days, and I found 3 charges I didn't recognize. 2 from the grocery store, 1 from a children's clothing website. $146 total. I went back through older statements, found more. Over 3 months, $612 charged to my account. I sat at the small kitchen table for a long time. I could hear the baby fussing upstairs, the shower running. The refrigerator hummed. I added up the numbers again. Same result. I didn't confront Corinne that morning. Maybe because I needed time to believe what I was looking at. Maybe because I was afraid of what I'd say if I opened my mouth before I was ready. That evening, I waited until the girls were in bed and Aaron had gone to the garage. I found Corinne on the couch with her laptop. I showed her the statements. I didn't raise my voice. She looked at them, the way a person looks at something they hoped wouldn't come up. Then, she said she'd meant to mention it, that she'd been meaning to transfer the money back, that things had been so hectic lately. I waited. She said she thought I didn't mind. She said it like a question. I looked at her for a long moment. I didn't ask whether she'd thought to ask. We both knew the answer. She transferred the money that night. Said sorry in the clipped way people say sorry when they feel caught rather than remorseful. Then she opened her laptop again and the conversation was over. That night, in my sunroom, I lay on the narrow daybed and stared at the ceiling. A car went past outside. The streetlight threw a pale stripe across the wall. I thought about the Thursday ceramics class I'd stopped attending, about my apartment, which I'd given up, turned over my lease, let it go, because Corinne had said there was no sense paying for a place I wasn't using. About Arlene, who texted twice in the past month and gotten my usual answer. Busy, but good. I thought, when is the last time I did something that wasn't for someone else? I couldn't answer that. It was 3 more weeks before I said anything out loud. One morning in December, I asked if I could speak with Corinne. She was getting ready for a work call but gave me 15 minutes. I could tell she'd already decided this was something she could fix quickly. I told her I needed more time for myself. Not a lot. Just a few afternoons a week when the kids were at school and the baby was napping, a window that was mine. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded slowly. Then she said, "Mom, we really depend on you. I don't think you understand how much." Not, of course, not you deserve that. Not, I'm sorry we haven't given you space. We really depend on you, as if that settled it, as if my need for myself was simply less important than her need for me. I looked at my hands on the table, then I nodded, said okay, and went back to making breakfast. But something had finished inside me. Not shattered, finished, like a sentence that finally reaches its period. That night, I took out the suitcases I'd brought from my apartment. Still had the little cedar block inside from when I'd packed in March. I sat on the floor and opened them and just looked at them for a while. I went through the sunroom slowly, touching things that were mine. A cardigan my sister had knitted for me 20 years ago, butter yellow, worn soft at the elbows. A small address book with numbers I still wrote in pen because I didn't trust them otherwise. 3 paperback novels I'd meant to read all summer. A photograph of Bernard standing in front of the first house we ever owned, squinting into the sun, looking younger than I remembered him. And at the bottom of my bag, wrapped in a dish towel, a small glass bowl I'd made in ceramics class, the only one I'd finished before I left. Glazed, pale blue, a little lopsided, perfect to me. I packed carefully, no rushing, no noise. By 1 in the morning, the suitcases were by the door. I slept a few hours, more than I expected. When I woke, the house was still dark. I made coffee, because I always made coffee, and I sat at the kitchen table one last time and drank it in the quiet. When Corinne came downstairs at 6:45, I was sitting there with my coat on and my purse in my lap. She stopped in the doorway. "Mom, I have to go," I said. She looked at the suitcases. Something moved across her face. Confusion, the beginning of alarm. And then, because she was Corinne, she reached for the practical thing. "What do you mean? The kids aren't up yet." "I know," I said. "I left a note for Mia on her backpack." "You can't just, Mom, we need to talk about this." I nodded. "We do, but not this morning." She said she didn't understand. She said I was being impulsive. She used the word I'd heard her use my whole adult life. Dramatic. And I noticed, maybe for the first time, that she only reached for that word when she needed me to stay still. I stood up, picked up the handles of both suitcases. They were heavier than I remembered. Corinne followed me to the door. Her voice had changed. Softer now, faster, the way voices get when something is actually leaving. She said she was sorry about the bank account. She said she knew things had been hard. She said we could make a schedule, a real one, with proper time off built in. I turned at the door and looked at her. She looked like my daughter. She also looked like someone who had forgotten, a long time ago, that I was a person and not a position. I said, "I'm not leaving because I'm angry. I'm leaving because I've been disappearing, and I need to find out what's left of me." Then, I walked out. The morning was cold in the way December mornings are. Gray and certain, no arguing with it. I loaded the bags, sat in the driver's seat a moment before starting the engine. The house lights were on. I could see Corinne's silhouette at the kitchen window. I drove. I called Arlene from a gas station 40 minutes out. She picked up on the second ring, and when I told her I'd left, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "I'll put the coffee on. Are you eating? Have you eaten?" She hadn't changed a bit. Her apartment was warm and cluttered in the best possible way. Stacks of library books on every surface. A ginger cat named Fitz, who barely acknowledged my arrival. A quilt on the couch she'd been working on since her kids were in middle school and probably never intended to finish. She handed me a mug and sat across from me and just looked at me the way old friends do, taking inventory. "You look tired," she said. 9 months tired, I said. She nodded. "And now?" I thought about it. Like I just got off a long flight, disoriented, but on the ground. She said that was enough for now. She said I could stay on the couch as long as I needed. She would not discuss rent, and she would not ask me to explain myself before I was ready. I thanked her. She told me to stop. I spent the next 4 days sleeping more than I had in months. My knees, which had been aching since September, eased slightly. I made an appointment with my doctor, a real one. I'd canceled 3 times because something always came up at the house. She examined me properly, took her time, and said I had the beginning of bursitis and needed to rest regularly, stay off hard floors, and stop doing things that hurt. Such a simple instruction. Stop doing things that hurt. I wrote it on a note card and put it on Arlene's windowsill, next to Fitz's food bowl. Corinne called twice. I let it go to voicemail. Aaron sent one text, just checking in, which told me Corinne had told him to send it. I didn't respond. Then on the 5th day, my phone rang and the contact read Mia's iPad. I answered before the second ring. "Grandma?" Her voice was careful, like she was testing the temperature of something. "Hi, sweet girl. Dad said you're visiting Arlene." "That's right." A pause. I could hear cartoons in the background, the particular sound design of the shows she liked. "You didn't say goodbye." "I know, I'm sorry about that. I left you a note." I read it. Another pause. "It said you loved me." "It did, because I do." "Then why did you go?" I sat down on Arlene's couch. The ginger cat, who had been ignoring me all week, chose this exact moment to step onto my lap and settle there. I told Mia that sometimes grown-ups need to take care of themselves, the same way she needed her own room to sleep and her own shelf for her books. That I didn't leave because of anything she did, that I would see her again. I just needed a little time to get settled. In a new house. "Working on it," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, will you have a reading corner? I hadn't thought about it, but I said yes, absolutely. I'll come read with you, she said, in the matter-of-fact way children state the things that matter most to them. When you're settled. It took everything I had not to cry. When we hung up, Arlene was standing in the kitchen doorway with 2 cups of tea. How'd she take it? She asked. Better than the adults, I said. The apartment I found was on the 3rd floor of a brick building at the end of a quiet street. 2 rooms, tall windows, a clawfoot tub that took forever to fill and was entirely worth the wait. The super, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Okafor, walked me through it on a Tuesday afternoon and said the previous tenant had kept plants everywhere. And they'd done very well in this light. I said I'd keep that in mind. I moved in on a Saturday. Arlene helped me carry boxes, insisted on buying lunch, and left me to unpack in silence, which was exactly what I needed. I arranged things slowly, choosing where everything went. The yellow cardigan on a hook by the door, Bernard's photograph on the windowsill, the pale blue ceramic bowl on the kitchen shelf. The first morning I woke without an alarm. I lay still for a long time. No small feet on the stairs, no baby monitor, no voice calling my name from another room. Just the radiator ticking and a pigeon on the fire escape and light moving across the ceiling. I made eggs. I ate them sitting at the window. I did not rush. I went back to ceramics class, the Thursday one. The instructor remembered me, which surprised me enough that I had to look away for a moment. I worked on a bowl for most of the session, lopsided again, tending toward one side, and this time I decided to let it lean. Some things come out better when you stop correcting them. Mia sent a letter. An actual paper letter, in an envelope she'd decorated with stickers, stars, and a small duck in the corner that I suspected was her own drawing. Inside, a page torn from her sketch pad. She'd drawn me in my new apartment, or her version of it. A tall yellow building with big windows. A figure with white hair standing at one of them, and beside her on a shelf, a round blue bowl. In the corner, in careful handwriting, when you're settled, I'll bring the red blanket. Love, Mia. I called Arlene and read it to her over the phone. Keep the envelope, Arlene said. The duck is art. I did. Corinne came in January. She texted first, which I appreciated. Asked if she could stop by, alone, just to see the place. I said yes, Saturday afternoon. She stood in my doorway and looked around slowly. The yellow light through the tall windows, the books on the shelf, the blue bowl, Bernard's photograph. She looked smaller to me than she had in her own house. I don't know why that surprised me. She sat at my kitchen table. I made tea. We didn't start with the hard things. She asked about ceramics. I showed her the bowl. She held it carefully, turning it over, and said it was beautiful. It's a little lopsided, I said. She looked at me. I know. We were quiet for a moment. Then she said, I didn't realize. That's the thing I need you to know. I genuinely didn't realize what it had become. I thought you were happy to be there. I don't know what I thought. That you were helping because you wanted to, not because we'd made it impossible to stop. I looked at her. At my daughter, who I had loved since before she had a name, who I had raised through hard years after Bernard got sick, who had grown into a capable and sometimes oblivious woman who was right now trying to find the shape of an apology. I said, I was happy to help in the beginning. And then I stopped knowing how to not help. Those are different things. She nodded. Her eyes were bright in a way that told me she was working hard not to cry. And I didn't try to make it easier for her. Some things you have to sit with. She said she was sorry. She said it plainly, without cushioning it with explanations. It was the best sorry she'd ever said to me, and I told her so. I said I wanted Mia to be able to visit. Properly, not as an exchange or a trade-off. Just because she was my granddaughter, and I loved her, and I wanted her to know this place as somewhere that belonged to me. Corinne said yes, of course. She asked if I would ever come back. Not to help, she was careful about that, just to visit. Dinner sometime, Mia's birthday. I told her I didn't know yet. That I'd spent 9 months disappearing inside her house, and I needed a little longer to make sure I was fully back before I walked back in. She said she understood. I didn't know if she fully did, but I believed that she wanted to. She hugged me at the door. The real kind, not the half-turned kind, but the whole kind. long enough that I could feel her breathing. After she left, I stood at the window and watched her car pull out and turn onto the street. Then I put on the kettle again. I sat at my small desk by the window and opened the notebook I'd been keeping since the first night in my own apartment. The pages were filling up slowly. Not plans, not complaints, just the small evidence of a life coming back to itself. I wrote, January. My daughter came today and said sorry. Mia's red blanket is in the closet waiting for her. The bowl on the shelf holds light differently depending on the hour. I am 64 years old and still learning how much space I'm allowed to take up. I underlined that last part. Outside, the January light was sharp and clear, the kind that makes everything look like it was just rinsed. I put down the pen. I watched the window, just the window, the sky behind it, the edge of the building, across the way where someone had left a small plant on the sill that had somehow lasted into winter. I wasn't all the way healed. I knew that. There are things that take time and things that take distance and things that take both, and I wasn't going to rush any of it. But I was in a room that smelled like me. I had a key that was only mine. I had a granddaughter who was going to bring a red blanket and a ceramics class on Thursdays, and a neighbor named Arlene who would be at my door on Friday with wine and absolutely nothing useful to say, and I loved her for it. I got up and refilled the kettle, just because I wanted more tea, just because I could. Some freedoms are enormous, and some are exactly this small and exactly this enough.